and welcome on The Barricades. This is a special edition that we produce along with theAnalysis.com. This is your host, Maria Chernat, and with me, as usual, the Bulgarian-born Polish journalist, Bojan Stanislavski. Thank you for being here with us.
Hello. Great to be here.
We are going to discuss today the situation in Kazakhstan because at the beginning of this January, the country was dominated by important protests that erupted in several cities. And since January 4th, they became quite violent. A lot of articles were written and a lot of speculations were made regarding this protest that in the final aftermath appeared to be a clash between President Kassym Tokayev and the former leader of Kazakhstan and current head of security, Nursultan Nazarbayev. The problem in Kazakhstan and the problem started when the prices for natural liquid gas nearly doubled from 0.1 euros to 0.2 euros. And that made people very angry. Kazakhstan is a very rich country. It has many natural resources, and the citizens are mainly use this form of gas to move around. They use it for transportation. And of course, a sudden doubling of the prices would have meant for a lot of them a huge financial burden. And this is why they started the protests. Now, on January 4th, all over the country, there were violent clashes between the security forces and the protesters. More than 3,000 people were detained and 12 people were killed during these clashes. Because Kazakhstan is a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, they asked for help. And let us discuss a little bit this collective security treaty that was signed in 1992. And it was signed by Commonwealth independent states and post-Soviet states. At the beginning, Russia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, those were the countries that initially signed the treaty, and then Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Georgia joined a year later. China is an observer member in this treaty, and this is important to note. And of course, as I told you, there were a lot of speculations, and I want to warn the viewers that we are not here to take sides. We are here to offer a nuanced and balanced perspective, because what happens now in Kazakhstan is very, very interesting. In the first part of our show, me and Boyan are going to look at the map. We are going to look at the foreign investment in Kazakhstan and also on the structure of the population. And only then we will begin discussing and analyzing some of the most important hypotheses to be made regarding the current crisis in this country. So first of all, Boyan, before going to the map, tell me just a very brief impression. What do you think of this protest?
Right. So this was a very difficult thing to analyze, really. First of all, I want to say that it's a confession that I have to make, and I think I owe that to our viewers and listeners, that I am not an expert in Central Asian issues, and I don't have great knowledge about how the political processes unfold in all those countries, like Kazakhstan, which is the kind of the beating heart of Central Asia. But of course, there are the other republics like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and of course Afghanistan, which is not a post-Soviet state, unlike those that I just listed out. But Kazakhstan is very interesting, of course, for people like us, and I feel it should be very interesting, or it should appear interesting to the Eastern European left, because this is This is a country that, with its resources, with its history as a part of the Soviet Union, is definitely to a certain extent linked politically to our region. Now, so that's one difficulty that, of course, I had to sort of struggle with, and I encountered immediately that I just don't know much. So I spent days, trying to figure out what is going on, what were the premises, the general situation, and so on and so forth, like the general context, right? Because obviously, everything that I accumulated as some sort of general knowledge was not enough for me to go in depth into the into what happened in Kazakhstan last week. Now, that was the first thing. But second thing was that immediately, right after the whole thing gained sort of violent traction, you know, the whole public opinion in the world, the global public opinion, so to say, was divided into two camps. And one was, of course, the Western camp, where everybody started. I mean, it wasn't reported as extensively as the events in Belarus or Ukraine, but the narrative was the same. People against authoritarianism, people against dictatorship, wanting human rights, wanting democracy, wanting everything that's good against everything that's bad, that's been ruling them, since the beginning of times, right? And that was one narrative. And then there's the Russian narrative, which is like, the usual thing, which is, again, CIA all over the place. It's like Americans, imperialists, the West, the collective West, they want to take down Kazakhstan. So, you look at this and you really have no way, if you're not if you don't spend enough time going through the whole through this thick surface of propaganda, if you like, right, then you're risking getting lost in the whole thing, and finally maybe losing interest and just waving, like shrugging your shoulders. Kazakhstan is like thousands of kilometers from
Let's see where it is. What do you
yeah,
say?
right, let's see where it is. You're right, so let me
It's
show the map.
important.
That's true. So Kazakhstan is what we're looking at is Central Asia, and we're now seeing Kazakhstan. Everything that you can see above is basically Russia, like in north of Kazakhstan, and southeast of Kazakhstan, or east of Kazakhstan, you can see Mongolia, which is here. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Anyway, this is Kazakhstan, and here is China, which is also pretty important. That is exactly here. Anyway, I'm not able to
We have
activate.
Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah. Anyway, that's like exactly China is in the in the southeast, in the east and southeast. And then there's Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, as well as Azerbaijan and Georgia, that you can see south and southwest, are former Soviet republics. And beneath that, we've got Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, and so on. So that's the geographical location. Now you can see I'm zooming out just so that you can get a better sense of it. Right, and it's kind of important, perhaps, to indicate at the beginning that Kazakhstan is a huge country in terms of territory and like geographical area that it covers, and it also has a very peculiar structure where. The Kazakhstani society is not exactly like the European or any other society that we know from Europe or North America or other states with the long Republican tradition, so to say. It's a state that is divided into also three zones, which are inhabited by so-called zhuzhes. And zhuz is an organization, I don't know, a federation, I don't know how to call it exactly, but it's a tribal organization. And it's split into three zhuzhes. There's the senior zhuz, there's the middle zhuz, and there's the junior zhuz, or the small zhuz, like and this young small zhuz is basically is in the country's west, in Kazakhstan's west, where also most of the resources are, natural resources I'm talking. And you mentioned that in your in your introduction, that Kazakhstan is a very rich country in terms of natural resources. We're talking about gas here, we're talking about oil, and also we're talking uranium here, which is very
Uranium.
important. I mean, Kazakhstan is by I think the first exporter of uranium in the world. I mean, they mine more uranium than Russia, China. So yeah, and this is the west basically. Then the north and northeast is the area which is I'm not sure how to refer to it exactly. Let's just say controlled for the sake of the discussion, controlled and inhabited by the senior Jews. And then there's the southwest and central part in the southern the southern and central part, and towards the east, which is the Middle Jews. And the western area, closer to the Caspian Sea and inhabited by people that are part of this young or small Jews, is the area that traditionally, since the fall apart of the Soviet Union and so on and so forth, served as the basis for further, it served as a basis for inception of protests and movements and social mobilizations that sometimes, would also transform themselves into mobilizations in the other parts inhabited by the other Zhuzhes. So many people and many journalists in Kazakhstan and in Russia, and that's, according to what I read in the press, read in the media, in the Russian media and the Russian language media from Kazakhstan and other Central Asian republics, is that many people in Kazakhstan and many people in the neighboring countries that know about Kazakhstan, they don't necessarily view this, like the other processes, social mobilizations that occurred before, as something necessarily very political. I mean, sometimes there was a clear political element to that, sometimes there wasn't, but many people also view that as a kind of rebellious attitude of those tribes and clans, because it's a complicated structure. So there's the Jews, which then splits into tribes, and then tribes split into clans, and so on and so forth, right? So it's a kind of complicated thing and complicated ladder. But anyway, that those people that belong to the young or small Jews, that they kind of have this rebellious attitude towards the other Jews, and that's one aspect that I think should be taken into consideration here, or at least should not be left out of the general picture. Because why? It transforms and translates rather into the political design, if you like, into the political architecture of the country, which, officially speaking, is a republic, and that's how formally, that's what it formally looks like. But then, because of that complicated structure that I mentioned, and because of certain formalities that are required by any republic to maintain, it it ended up creating a certain, a peculiar arrangement where you have the upper class that recruits mostly from people from certain clans or from certain, groups within that structure that I just explained. And they have to rule over, kind of right over their rule above anything else, in order to be able to, manage the country politically and in all other aspects. And this, linked to the Soviet past and the bureaucracy running the state and so on and so forth, created a very specific circumstances where the civil servants and the people around the president and the government and so on and so forth can exercise enormous power, and have and are very easily incentivized to corruption, because they can just do anything. And this, was very, this was a construction that has always been very difficult to manage, always, particularly, when the corruption sort of kicked in for good in the 90s, and after the fall of the Soviet Union. you know the person that was in charge Nursultan Nazarbayev, who used to be an important member of the Politburo of the Kazakhstani Communist Party, that used to be part of the CPSU, before 1989, before 1991. He was able to sort of, it's a long story again, and we don't have the time to go into the details of that, although it's very interesting, but he was able to assert himself as the person that is going to be able to balance between all those structures and between all those cascading dependencies. And he was, and of course, I mean, the fact that he was an able bureaucrat does not mean I defend him. And as you said in the beginning, that we're not here to take sides. He was an able bureaucrat, obviously, but that all does not mean. I mean, the fact that he was an able bureaucrat and he was able to sort of put those things together and maintain them somehow does not mean that the contradictory processes were not there. Kazakhstan is full of all kinds of contradictions.
And speaking of which, this is the perfect segue to look a little bit at the foreign investment, because I find on statia.com a very nice map that shows you exactly the situation of foreign investment in this country. And I think it's very important for us to consume it, to look at this map, because it is not Russia who is in the first place here in terms of foreign investment. Let us now share the screen and see whether we can look at
absolutely
the map.
Yes, I'm looking for that right now. And let me see, I think it's here. The distribution of foreign investments. I'm turning it on. Here it is.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, now we can see that.
So you see how interesting this is.
Sorry. It's here. I'm sorry.
That basically Netherlands, the Dutch shell is there, isn't it? And then the United States, and then Switzerland, and then China and Russia are sharing only 6% in terms of foreign investment. So while it is true that this country, Kazakhstan, is a member of that security treaty that they signed in 1992, along with other post-Soviet states that I mentioned at the beginning of our show, in terms of foreign investment, it is important for our viewers to consume the idea that the lion's share is taken by the Netherlands and the United States. Just look at this statistic and how visually it is so, it speaks for itself, showing that they are the dominant players here. So basically, Chevron and Dutch Shell are dominating the foreign investment in this country. And I think this is important for our viewers to consume this. And basically, also this map, why is this image very important? Because it shows that it will not be likely that in this country you will have major sources of uprising coming from the workers, because the major corporations that are dominating the landscape are the ones that are very anti workers and have a vested interest in keeping the status quo. Now, the status quo, as Boyan mentioned, was that almost for 30 years, that person,
Nursultan
Nazarbayev, that actually named the Astana, the capital, after his name, Nursultan.
He first moved it, by the way, from Almaty. He moved it over to Astana, and then he renamed it after his own name.
Rebranded. It is like I would be the president of Romania and I would change the name of the capital into Moria. That would be fantastic, just to understand how insane this is. But this is the current situation, and he took a step back, and now he had this idea to leave the country into the very wise hands of his daughter. But of course, that was not possible. So she chose a different disciple into the person of Kassym Tokayev. And this Kassym Tokayev seems to move a little bit further. Now, Nazarbayev was not out of the picture completely, because he was still running, isn't it, the Security Council.
That's,
and he had an influence. But now, during the clashes, and it seems that Tokayev used this opportunity to dismiss all members of the government, and a lot of the members of the government were close to this one, Nazarbayev, the
Yeah,
supreme
yeah,
leader.
that's true. Well, actually, that's also an important nuance for people to understand. But in many, well, in many maybe not, but in some post-Soviet countries, the Security Council, including Russia, by the way, is a very important body which actually manages to a large extent the internal political process in Russia too. And by the way, like Putin, for example, in Russia, he started out as the head of the Security Council. And many people who are expected to remain active in politics, but they should not be the face of the political process, they are getting sent there. Like, for example, Medvedev, in Russia, he played a part in the Security Council, leading the work of the Security Council when he stopped becoming and being, because they were sort of shuffling it back and forth, but like prime minister or president of the Russian Federation. And the same happened here. So well, there was obviously a problem with Nursultan Nazarbayev, not just because with the course of time he started to develop this kind of narcissistic tendencies, starting to think that like naming the city after his own name, publicly sort of displaying the will that his daughter inherits all the powers in Kazakhstan. And by the way, I want to say that it wasn't completely out of question. By the way, like again, it's a whole different story. How come that she was sort of sidelined? But it wasn't out of question, and it wasn't out of question particularly because the political process in Kazakhstan and the political or maybe the architecture of the political process, if you like, does not look the same as it does in, I don't know, in Europe or America or something like that. Same goes for Belarus, by the way. In the political process in Belarus, that does not resemble the one that we know from maybe formally, like in Kazakhstan, to some extent, but otherwise it's like the essence of it is completely different. And I don't want to judge here, like whether it's good or bad and stuff like that.
Yes, this is
Obviously
the
there are some,
situation. And for
yeah,
the
obviously there are
part,
some authoritarian tendencies which I don't like. That's true, but I'm not gonna now,
this is the situation, yeah.
yeah, that's a situation that has always been there. That has been there for decades. So uh, it's like. There were problems with him, not with Nazarbayev, not only because of his narcissistic, whatever other tendencies and dictatorial measures that were increasingly stupid and that were kind of compromising the country and all the rest of it. That was really just the window dressing that was ugly. Apart from that, there was this thing that he thought, or according to everything that I read, that's my conclusion. He seems to have thought, like Lukashenko, that he can be, the smart guy, and he's gonna, he's gonna play ball with the West. He's gonna play ball with the Russians. He's gonna play ball with everyone, and that worked for a period of time when Russia was, on its knees, like not being able to assert like its sovereignty and stuff like that, and when Russia was weak and was afraid to take any action and so on and so forth. But things have changed, okay, and we've spoken about that many times in our program. I'm not going to repeat that, but now when Russia is in this under this huge international pressure, then obviously things are different, and Nursultan Nazarbayev became an increasing annoyance for them, because not because he wanted to play ball with the West, not so much because of that, but he was not a reliable partner for any kind of discussion. Like, he was not able to deliver to the Russians whatever they would agree. They would never be able to be sure whether that's going to be delivered, that's going to happen, and so on and so forth. So of course, the situation for them was dangerous, because Kazakhstan is not like any other small country that you can just write off the whatever sphere of influence that you have as a superpower. It's a very serious place with a lot of resources, and also a 7,000 kilometers long land border with Russia. I believe it's probably the longest border that Russia has in land border that Russia has with any other country. So it's a matter of national security, obviously, for Russia in these circumstances that we observe now. So,
Let us now
Tokayev.
also look, please, at the
Yeah,
structure of the
sure,
population to see
absolutely.
how
Let's go
many
for it.
people live there and what is the structure by religion and ethnic groups, because this is also
There you go.
important
Yeah,
to see. So this is the situation in Kazakhstan. Population 19 millions roughly, and the Muslim population is 70% Christian, 20%. And if you look a little bit down, you will see that there are two major groups here, of course, the Kazakh population, 63%, and also Russians, 23%. 4
yes,
million people are Russians living in Kazakhstan still. So this is also very important. Of course, we have it
yeah,
by age group, but this is not so important.
yeah,
It is
yeah. You're
important
right.
to see the ethnic and religious composition of the population. Yes, I would say so. And it's very important to know that also Russia has there, isn't it, an important base where they launched Sputnik from. So this is
Exactly.
also a
That's
major
exactly what I was
importance
gonna say.
for. So it's very important for the Russians to keep things quiet
Yeah,
and keep things and keep the status quo and not have this.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important what you just said. That's why let me just weigh in for very
Yes.
briefly on that, because the Cosmodrome is now has the status of a sort of rented territory. Okay, that's rented by Russia. It's paid for and so on and so forth. It's not as some people claim. Uh, out of any jurisdiction of of the Kazakhstani authorities or anything like that. But anyway, it's a very important strategic thing, and this is an inheritance from the Soviet times, because during the Soviet times, many engineers, many scientists, and stuff like that uh, were sent to Kazakhstan to develop, the astronautic technologies and so on and so forth. Which, by the way, Kazakhstan benefited greatly. Okay, in a sense that this was basically the first influx of modern technology and modern science into that territory of that country. And it remains there. The Cosmodrome remains there, and also the fact that the country is huge territorially, but it's not densely populated. We're talking about what, 20 million
Mhm,
people,
mhm, mhm.
more or less, right? So we're talking about, like, I don't know, more or less like Romania, right? I mean, this is the population of Romania. This is three, four times the population of Bulgaria. I don't know, half of the population of Poland, but like territorially, this is nothing comparable by any stretch. I mean, Kazakhstan is vast, is huge, and that also gives science certain opportunities. We're talking here about nuclear weapons testing. We're talking here about like all kinds of military technology being tested out there, and also huge spaces for drills, which is also very important. And the Kazakhstani army.
Unfortunately, because this is where we live today, and you cannot
Yeah,
expect people to go with a peaceful solution. So this is so
not
interesting that
now,
they would
at
use
least.
this,
Yeah.
not now,
Yeah. Yes.
unfortunately.
You're of course you're totally right. But then I want to go back to Nursultan Nazarbayev and his
Mhm,
figure, and
mhm,
why
mhm, mhm.
why has he been increasingly irritating for the Russians, and not only for the Russians, for anyone pretty much who wanted to maintain some stability, because the older he was getting, the more amortized, so to say, his regime was becoming, the more of a theater he had to be coming up, right? Like, we know that from Eastern Europe perfectly. When there's no solutions, there's the theater starts to play itself out, and it was pretty much the same thing there. Now, the thing that was very often used, and that is a very useful tool for post-Soviet leaders, were nationalistic tendencies that they were able to exploit, and that actually they have been, I should say, because they still do that in many places, to exploit in order to define themselves as a separate country, separate state, separate entity, separate nation, separate everything. And it was a relatively fairly difficult task, because after 50 years or 70 years of being in the Soviet Union, that's where certain
And this is
things.
so ridiculous, Boyan, because if you look at the
Right.
map and you see the size of foreign investment, what kind of sovereignty are you talking about? Just
Right.
look at that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the Netherlands and the United States putting the thumbs on your neck, and you are under the
Of course.
economically. What currency? Of course, this is PR. This is a famous Russian that says something like, when patriotism is debated in an extensive manner, somebody stole something, or
Yeah, that's
economically something is not right. And
I
I
think
think
that
this
what
is
you
the
yeah.
perfect opportunity.
What you who, the person you're referring to, if I'm not mistaken, is Piotr or Peter Kropotkin, who is, by the way, the only anarchist theoretician that I'm aware of. Like all others, other figures, prominent figures of international anarchism, have never elevated themselves to the level of actually creating some sort of political theory. So Piotr Kropotkin had many great phrases, by the way, and that's true. I think that's true. In this case, in the case of the fall apart of the Soviet Union and the sort of the assertion of those states and entities and the ruling classes of those states as a political and meaningful factor in internal and international politics, they often resorted to that because this was the easiest thing. Everybody was bashing communism, and communism finally ended. Everybody was finally free, allegedly, right? So now we should just sort of try to manifest ourselves, and the easiest way to do that is to create some kind of mythology. I'm sure you know much more than I do about this sort of things, because you're a researcher, and I know that you've been into this business. Well, not into the business of doing that, but into the business of researching this. So
Of
Nursultan
analyzing it, yes.
Nazarbayev. Right, right. So Nursultan Nazarbayev was doing exactly that, and many people were doing that. Lukashenko was doing that. Kuchma was doing that, like the first president of Ukraine, independent Ukraine, and so on and so forth. Like the first thing he did was publishing a book, "Ukrainians Are Not Russians," or something along the lines of it. I can't remember exactly the title, but something
Yeah.
like this.
Yes, of
Which
course.
which in like if such a book was produced in Kazakhstan, then it would actually make a lot more sense in a way that Kazakhstani people are obviously, by the way they look and by their ethnicity and by their aesthetics, by their civilizational code, if you like, are totally different from or in many aspects, let's say not totally, but in many aspects different from the Russians. Whereas Ukrainians or Belarusians, I mean, how can you really tell the difference? Okay, so
Yes, yes.
right, so
There
I
were
want to say,
also those people in Moldova. I remember that,
oh yeah, yeah.
Moldovans are not Romanians. We speak Moldovan language,
Yes.
and this is so ludicrous
Yeah.
because it's almost, 99.9% is the same. So,
Yeah, it's like Croatian and Serbian and stuff like this is complete nonsense. But when we spoke, since we spoke of the national ethnic national composition, this is one of the basic contradictions that I mentioned at the beginning of the program. Okay, like it's not just that 1/5 or 1/4 of the population is Russian. Okay, we're talking about many Kazakhstani people that are Russian speaking or even Russian identifying to some extent. Okay, for whom the Russian language is the first language that comes before the Kazakhstani language. Okay, so and this is very important. Okay, this is something that you just cannot ignore. And Nursultan Nazarbayev was actually trying to play with this card, which always ends up badly. And for example, some time ago he was even attempting to remove the Cyrillic alphabet from the Kazakh, and to replace it kind of with the Latin. Now it's like they're supposed to have equal status, like in Serbia, for example. In Serbia, you have equal status. Like the official alphabet is the Cyrillics, but it's okay to use the Latin
mhm, mhm,
transcription as well.
mhm.
And same is pretty much like with all the simplifications of the explanation I'm providing right now. But let's say it's the similar situation right now with the Kazakhstani Kazakh language. And let us also, because many people in the West would tell you, oh, this is a sign of Russian cultural imperialism. They want to enforce Cyrillics on everyone. Well, guys, guess what? I mean, the Kazakh language before that had no script. So it's not like, it's not any imperialism. It's just like the natural development of how things go, right? Anyway, that's just a note on the side. But Nursultan Nazarbayev was doing even that. It's a thing which is very offensive or insulting to Russians to do this. It's like removing, for example, the Red Army monuments in Eastern Europe, something that has really enraged the Russians, because it's like for them, and I have I do know the Russian reality to some extent. For them, it's like spitting in their in their face. It's like spitting on the most sacred thing of their historical identity and historical memory. So Nursultan Nazarbayev, despite the fact that until now, even throughout this dispute, he was referred to as a pro-Russian or Russian-controlled leader, which is a complete nonsense. And at the same time, now I have no evidence for this, but I came across that kind of comments in many places, that he was also grooming groups of Kazakhstani nationalists and stuff like that, that he would eventually use in some kind of confrontations that would occur along the lines of what I explained in the beginning, between the Zhuzhes or between the tribes or between whatever other, as I said, cascading dependencies that occur in this country. And because he was getting that irritating, because he was getting that annoying, and because he was playing ball with the West to the extent that Russians felt at certain point he's going way too far. And also, China was asserting itself as a superpower, over the last couple of years, and was trying to sort of secure itself from abroad because of the tensions that are growing over Taiwan, and before that as well. So Kazakhstan became pretty much a focal point, and obviously there were some incentives produced by Moscow and Beijing, and also within Kazakhstan, within the Kazakhstani elite, within this bureaucratic caste, so to say, that Nursultan Nazarbayev is creating more trouble than stability, and that he had to be removed. But this is why he ended up in the Security Council, because of that complicated architecture and structure in Kazakhstan. It was very difficult to actually get rid once and for good for him. I mean, there are too many factors supporting him and depending on him being in power in order for to just stage a coup that would not lead to some kind of horror, that would become uncontrollable. Okay, so that's what they did, is like through all kinds of maneuvering, and again, that's a very long story. I spent like 3 days reading through this and sort of getting, and it's a complicated story how through bureaucratic maneuvering with support from abroad, he was able to be pushed away in 2019, accompanied by mass protests, by the way, which again, mass protests that a lot could be said about them. We don't have the time about it, but there were mass protests, and this served as a pretext, or as a context rather than a pretext, to detach him from the from being a president, which is the most important function, okay, that you can
And
have
put
in
him the
Kazakhstan.
head of the Security Council.
Exactly, but not to get rid of him totally, but to sort of make some space, okay, in this and then that's when Tokayev stepped in, and then he's got a very interesting biography, the guy Tokayev, and again,
We are
I'm not
going
taking
to discuss it in the second segment of our show,
right.
because
Okay, we're
we
running
just
out of
want,
time.
yes, we're running out of time, and we wanted to present a little bit some basic details regarding Kazakhstan, some basic details regarding the very complicated recent history in this country. And we looked where this country is, and foreign investment, the structure of population, and Boyan gave us a very informed and nuanced perspective on the power structure that is way more complicated than the mainstream media narratives coming from the West or the East may have us believe. So, in the hope that you enjoy this presentation, we end here the first segment of our show, and we will discuss in the second segment the reactions and the international media and how this very complex situation happening in Kazakhstan was presented in a very simplistic and unproblematic way for the viewers and the readers. And we are going to go into that, of course, analyzing further the nuances of this very complicated power structure in Kazakhstan. Thank you so much, Boyan, for joining and for this information. And to the viewers, please support us. Go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/The Barricade. Thank you, Paul and the analysis, for the opportunity to address your readers and viewers. And with the hope that this was useful and interesting, we end the first segment here. See you in our next segment. All the best.
Thank you. All the very best.